All right, so I'm recording now, and like I said before, there's things in here that I leave open-ended so that you have to look them up on your own. Um, it's important to familiarize yourself with the rules and the regulations associated with funeral service to get through this test. All right. So is everybody registered for the test? Is anybody not registered? Does anybody have any issues with that? 'Cause I see some new names in here, which is fine. Like I said, we open this up to all programs, anybody, wherever you want. I don't care, but just making sure nobody's had any issues getting registered for the exam. All right, I'll take that as a yes. So, all right, the state board exam. So again, remember the New Jersey statute is annotated versus we're talking about the difference between the statutes and the code, right? So the code can be changed by the state board. The statute that has to go through the legislature, that has to go through the Senate or the governor's office or whatever. When they changed the regulations back in 2019 regarding food in funeral homes, that went through the governor's office. So that supersedes what the state board can do, but the state board can change most things. And when you're talking about things like what instruments are required inside of a prep room, well, that comes down to the state board making that decision. Larger issues like, again, food in the funeral home, that goes up to the legislature and they make that decision. So again, you don't need to remember the exact numbers on any of this. I'm just giving this to you as a reference point of where all of this stuff comes from, right? You look at the statutes and regulations. And again, if you have questions about that, you just you can always reach out to me. I can get you the link for it. But if you just go to the state board's website, they've got a link right there for both of them, for both the statutes and the regulations. And remember, regulations come from the state board. Statutes come from the legislative body. Now, obviously, it's larger than just the funeral service. Things like health and vital statistics working in this, corporate names, that comes from a different area as well. The medical examiner plays into this, advanced funeral payments, all of this stuff comes from different areas. And you don't need to remember these numbers, all right? You're not going to see a question on this test that says, what is NJSA 26? You're not going to see that, but this is the source material for all of this stuff. All right. I would really focus your research and your review on the statutes and the regulations. And there's a lot of them in New Jersey. I'm licensed in New Jersey. I used to be licensed in Pennsylvania. I let that license lapse just because I wasn't practicing there over there anymore. And like in New Jersey, it's like 300 pages worth of material. I don't know the exact number, but I'm making that up. It's a lot. In Pennsylvania, it was like 45 pages. Like, it's so much more in New Jersey. They get so specific on these things about everything from medical waste to the specific diseases that you need to report back to the state board, to the specific chemicals that cannot be used in embalming fluid. I don't understand why, but I don't make embalming fluid. I'm guessing you guys don't make embalming fluid. I don't know why they do that, but like New Jersey gets wildly specific in this stuff. So again, just a difference in the terminology, a difference in a license between a certificate of registration. A license is a license for the individual. Certificate of registrations for a building. That's for the funeral home, right? Difference in licensure. Like I just went through like 4 hours of classes in the last 2 days. God, that stuff is boring. And you're probably thinking the same thing listening to me. I get that. But it is so damn boring. But remember that the license for the individual is re-upped in the odd years. And I always remember this, that every funeral director that I've ever met is a bit of an oddball, right? And then the certificate of registration is for the funeral home. So that's on the even years, right? So it's always one off on that. Difference between a death certificate and a burial permit, right? And in basic concept, and this has been blurred over the past couple of years because of EDRS. It used to be you would fill out a death certificate, you would physically take that down to a government office, you would hand it off to them, they would approve it, they would then go, okay, everything's fine, and they would hand you a burial permit. Today, it's you just fill everything out on EDRS and you print the burial permit. The basic concept between the two is the death certificate is what you need to take to a government office to then get approval to have the individual buried or cremated or whatever you're doing. Had an issue with confirming my application. Confirming my application has received, paid the fee, and have confirmation. I sent my application to Cynthia right after January 30th, but I hadn't heard anything back. Reached out to her on Friday, but she told me she hasn't finished going through her emails. I didn't want to delay or interrupt the review. My email is okay. Well, like, feel free to email me about this. Realistically, you should just stay in touch with Cindy. And she's the person who can confirm this. It's really sort of outside of my hands. But so long as she has received that confirmation, if he has paid, you should be good. Okay. I can't confirm that. Like I said, it's outside of my hands, but please feel free to email me. My email address is Daley. It's on the thing, Daley, DALEY, M as in Michael, at the Michael CCC 3cs.edu, and I'm happy to discuss it with you. But yeah, it's one of those situations that if they've taken your check, you should be good. If you got an application, you should be good. I just can't confirm it. All right. So burial permit versus a transit permit. This is one of these weird things where you would think that, and remember, anytime that a body goes on to a vehicle that has other people on it, let's say a plane, a train, not that you do trains a lot, but or let's say even a bus. I know that doesn't happen a lot, but then you would need that transit permit to do so. If you're just driving somebody across state lines or across the state in a hearse, that's fine to do so if it's just you and that hearse. But when you get into a common carrier type situation where you've got other people, that's where you need that transit permit, right? So, and you would think it would be more involved than this, but it's just a button that you click, or even back in the day when you'd have a physical burial permit, you would just check off on it like, okay, make it a transit permit. You would think there'd be more to it than that, but there's not. It's just click. Oh, it's magically, it's a transit permit now. It's one of these weird things that. So a license is required. Remember what a license is required for, what it's not required for. Arranging and pre-arranging. You can't do pre-arrangements. You can't sell merchandise. You can't sign forms. Family comes in and they show up. Like, I work at a funeral home on the side, and my wife works there. She's the secretary there. She's not licensed, but she's been around funeral service for 25 years now. If a family walks in and they go, well, how much is a direct cremation? Or they call her, or they call on the phone and go, well, how much is direct cremation? She can read off of the general price list and go, well, okay, it's $2,500 of whatever the cost is. She can't sit down with the family and write up a statement of funeral goods and services. You need a licensee to do that. Even as an intern, you can't do that. You would need to buy the licensing standards. And you're supposed to do 25 of them to get licensed in New Jersey, whether you're sitting in on them or whether you're running them. But you need to sit down and write everything up and have it approved by your preceptor or another funeral director. And then they would sign off on it with the understanding of the family that you're not licensed yet, but you're sort of handling these things, and most families are fine with that. You need to be licensed to sign a death certificate. You need to be licensed to embalm. They do open the door for interns. Once you're an intern, you're registered, you're allowed to take part in embalmings, but you're supposed to have a license there, or at least in a reasonable distance. Wherein, let's say that I know of one funeral home where here's the funeral home, and the funeral director lived in a big house behind it. It was a beautiful home. Let's say he goes home for lunch and you're the intern, you're there embalming. Okay, he's still close enough. You can go, hey, Bob, I'm having an issue. Can you come over here? He or she or whomever is close enough, they're able to run over and do that. So they just have to be within a reasonable distance. They can't be like down in Florida or something going, yeah, whatever, you knock yourself out, kid, have fun. Like they have to be close enough if there's an issue to be able to respond to it, and they have to be present at the point of disposition. Now, this was relaxed during the pandemic. During the pandemic, they basically said, all right, interns can take bodies to the crematory or to the cemetery, things like that. They've pulled back on that, but many of you may have done this during that time because they just opened, they said, look, it's a crazy time. It hadn't happened in 100 years, right? That's what 1918, 1919, whatever the last one was. I said, look, all right, fine. But they've pulled back on that now. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, as far as supervising visitations, dressing and caskets and removal, anybody can do those. Anybody can do this. I know of a very, very competent guy who just never went to school, who he runs viewings all the time. And he can dress and casket. He helped me dress and casket my wife's grandfather when he died. That was probably close to 10 years ago. But it's one of those deals, or removal, that's fine. Other states is different. Like I know in Delaware, they require a license for removal. Not so in New Jersey. Anybody can do a removal. I use a removal company. The funeral home that I work for uses a removal company, which is great because 3 a.m, phone rings and it's a death call. It's called Jerry and go, hey, Jerry, can you get this body? He goes, yeah, it's fine, whatever, I go get it. Thank God I don't have to get it to bed. I get to make a quick phone call and go back to sleep. But dressing and casting is the same thing, and supervising visitations. And the same is true of memorial services. Remember, once a body has been cremated, it's no longer considered human remains by the state. And there's a weird gray area here, because anybody can take those remains to a cemetery, let's say, rather than taking a casketed body. There is still a responsibility with those. As a funeral director, you can't just take them and hand them off to anybody. The neighbor shows up, oh, I'm just going to pick up Bob's remains. Oh, yeah, fine, here you go, knock yourself out. You also can't go, family didn't pick them up, let me just toss them in the trash because they thought they were trash anyway, so let me just chuck them in the garbage. No, they still have that there's still that human value to them, but anybody can direct a service for them. And that's the weird thing about that sort of weird gray area. So license renewal, like I said, it's biannual, every 2 years, even for funeral homes, odd for personnel. And like I said, every funeral director I know is an oddball, including myself. So that's the easy way to remember it. And I know that I've just had to take these classes over the last couple of days. God, they are boring. And I need to get the 10 credits and all that stuff and whatever. But remember, the oddball funeral directors are in the odd years, right? So 2023, 2025, 2027, etc. Whereas funeral homes are in the even years, 2022, 2024, 2026. Yeah, and so forth. The renewal expectations. Remember the continuing education, and we'll get into that in a bit. Remember the 10 credits, and remember what comprises that 10 credits, because there's 5 of them that are mandatory, and we'll get into that. License lapse, renewal requirements, and time issues. There used to be a waiver where you can push out for 5 years, and we'll talk about this in a bit, where if you were within 5 years, you could just pay the whatever is owed, and as far as the continuing ed credits for each year, and the renewal amounts for each year. and re-up if you were in for 5 years. So they've changed this. They changed this in 2019, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, because they changed it to just one renewal period. So if you're within 5 years, all you have to do is pay the charges for one renewal period, and then do the continuing ed for one renewal period, and then it's fine. You call it a day, but we'll talk about that. So new for continuing education programs must be approved by the board. Then again, 2019, there was something called the sundown laws, where they have to renew all of the laws and regulations every 7 years. Just make sure everything's just what needs to be updated, new in 2019, pre-need providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of the lessons. And CU instructor must maintain records for 5 years. So anybody teaching about pre-need, or really any of the other continuing ed, they have to ensure the completion of the lessons, and they have to make sure that they keep these records for at least 5 years. Meaning, I sat through 2 lessons today, and damn, it was boring. But they have to ensure that I'm there. They have to ensure, like, I have to log in, and then they're switching this back to, during the pandemic, they allowed everything to sort of be like this. Now they make it, well, what they will go back to as of, I think, March of this year, is you have to be there physically in person. They make sure that you're there, and they scan you in, like when you go in something at the convention or whatever, you go in, they scan your card, and they make sure, okay, here's who you are, you're John Smith, great, okay. And if you walk out to make a phone call or use the restroom or whatever, they clock you out, and you have to be there. And if you are there for less than, or if you've left for more than 10 minutes, then it's void. It's completely done. And back in, I'm going back years, it's going back to like 2012, I went to an OSHA one, and it was halfway through it. It was a 3-hour thing. It was an hour and a half through it. We stepped out for a break, and we put on a house call. So I had to leave to go get the seating. And yeah, they were like, yeah, no, you got to start over from scratch. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And this was in Cherry Hill, and I had to, the next one was like up in Newark or something like that. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But I had to start back from scratch, but they have to monitor who is there and make sure that you actually complete the lessons. And now here's one of the weird things about this regulation. And they say, oh yeah, they have to give you a questionnaire at the end of it, to make sure you learn something. The questionnaire that I got over the last 4 that I took, the last 8 I took, let me correct myself, was your name, your license number. Did you like this program? Good or bad, or no, or yes, or maybe? And that was fine. That they haven't like specified that you need to question somebody on what they've learned. Because it makes no sense to me, but they have to give us some sort of a questionnaire at the end, and it's go, yeah, great, here's my name, whatever. That's fine as a questionnaire. Wonderful. They don't care what makes that up. But the association, that's who I did all these programs with, they have to hold that for 5 years. They have to hold that I was in the 2 today, the 2 yesterday, and whatever I did last month, right? They have to hold that for 5 years. So inactive license, this was something they did, and this is a weird thing they were talking about in the one of the meetings I was in, one of the classes that I was in. They were acting like inactive licenses still existed. They don't. Inactive licenses are gone. And what this was a buddy of mine, he runs a funeral home down in Salem County, and his grandfather started the funeral home, but he's in his like mid 80s. So he wants to spend his days golfing and whatever. And he's just at that point that they're like, maybe he shouldn't be running funerals. So they just let his license go inactive, and they wanted to just keep him listed as a quote unquote inactive license. That way you can still put them into the advertising. John Smith Funeral Home, John Smith III, who founded, he's still here and he shows up and whatever. they've done away with that altogether. So you either have a license or you don't. It's one or the other. Like I said, as of 2019, gone. So that license lapse that I was talking about, like I said, up to 5 years. Now they're only requiring the fees and the CEUs for the current and the previous licensing period. Also, New Jersey now recognizes out-of-state CEUs for relicensure. So let's say that you let your New Jersey license lapse, but you're practicing in Pennsylvania and you're doing CEUs over there, right? Pennsylvania requires 6 versus the 10 that New Jersey requires, and you're there for a year and a half or 2 years. You said, I'm going to come back to New Jersey, and your license, excuse me, I just ate dinner a little while ago. So now you come back to New Jersey and you've got, let's say, the 12 credits versus the 20 credits that New Jersey has over those 2 years. I'm sorry, excuse me, 4 years, those 2 licensing periods. They'll go, okay, we'll recognize those, and that's fine. You just need to make up the other 8 credits to get up to the 20 that's needed. Yeah, and you'll need to pay the fees from this past year, and then we'll call it a day. Now, here's the weird thing about this is, here's what's weird. Outside of 5 years, what they always said was, all right, what you'd have to do if your license was gone for 5 years, more than 5 years, and decide you went off and did something else. You went off and became a banker or something. I don't know. And you go off and they would say, okay, well, here's what you have to do. You've got to make up all those CEUs, and you have to do an internship of 3 months to a year. You have to do 25 bombings, funerals, and arrangements. And you have to retake the jurisprudence exam and the practical. Now they go, well, we'll just decide on a case-by-case basis. So I don't know what this means. Let's say you're going 5 or 6 or 7 years and you decide to come back and go, I want to get licensed again. I don't know what they will tell you. I have no idea. They will make it up on a case-by-case basis. I have no idea what the hell this means. And nobody's tested this. Like I said, this just went through in 2019 and the world collapsed in 2020. So nobody has tested this thing out. I have no idea. But on paper, that's what it is. They will decide on a case-by-case basis if you're more than 5 years out. So, all right, things that you need to look up and things you need to know. And if you have taken, I've seen some of my students in here, if you have, go back and look at laws, rules, and regulations. All of the notes lay these out. All of the slides lay these out. If anybody needs them, reach out to me. I'm happy to share them with you. I've got all of the whole classes on YouTube, but I have them locked down. But anybody that wants them, please feel free to reach out to me. I don't care where you went to school. I want everybody to pass this thing first time through. But what do you know about record keeping, and how long do you need to keep those records? And this is things like, the funeral home records, right? Like the first year needs to be available immediately. The next 6 years need to be available within 2 weeks. You can store them off of the ground or whatever. What do you do with medical records, right? Remember, medical records have to be kept 30 years, the term of employment plus 30 years. So if somebody works at a funeral home and they get the hepatitis B vaccination, and they work there for 10 years and then leave, that funeral home has to keep that record for ultimately 40 years, the 10 years while they were there, and then 30 years after. Things along those lines. What do you need to keep as far as cremation records? And what does a cemetery need to keep? And what does a crematory need to keep? And there's all this stuff in the regulations that is broken down. Like the cemetery needs to, a crematory needs to keep things like, the name of the funeral home, name of the decedent, name of the next of kin, their address, the disposition of cremated remains, meaning did they go back to the funeral home? Did they go back to the family? Did they scatter them on the family's behalf? They don't need to know what the family does with them, but they need to know if the family's taking them. Okay, the family took them, that's where they were going, or they went back to the funeral, whatever the case may be. All right. So itemization, look at FTC stuff. That's all fair game. If oh darn it, let me see if I have it real quick. Yeah, if you don't have it, just email me. The FTC rules for funeral service. There's a purple book, which I have it digitized. And if anybody needs a copy of it, please feel free to email me and I will get it to you. I know I've given it out to my students. I see people here who were not my students, but please feel free to reach out if you don't have a copy of it. Like I said, I can just email it to you, not a problem. FTC forms for New Jersey compliance. What's the difference between the two? What's required by the FTC? What's required by New Jersey? And this is things like the 50% ownership rule. If you own more than one funeral home, yeah, let's say you own 10 funeral homes. And even if it's like I owned 3 and it was myself, my mom, and my brother, and we had things broken down where I owned 40, my brother owned 40, my mom owned 20. So we're like, we're fine. No, that wasn't the case at all. We owned that amount of a company and the company owned 100% of the funeral homes. So we had to disclose all of that on our general price list. That's not the case by the FTC. If you're in Wisconsin or something, they don't have that rule. It's a New Jersey specific rule. So remember, when you're taking this test, focus on New Jersey. Now, FTC comes into it, but you need to separate the difference between what's required by New Jersey and what's required by the FTC. Proper expectations, things like the equipment, and there's a whole list of instruments that are required. You need to have at least one aneurysm hook, one trocar, one cannula, one scalpel, etc. Right? There's a whole list there. And if anybody's ever dealt with an inspector, and an inspector ever shows up, always be nice. Always be nice if they show up. Don't be mean to them, because if you're mean, they'll find something. Yeah. Things like it has to be a separate room that is used specifically for that purpose. You can't go, okay, well, we embalm here, but when we have a viewing, it's the ladies, it's the ladies' restroom or something like that. You can't. It has to be specific to that. It needs to have walls that are sealing the floor, right? And again, I know that sounds silly, but prohibitions on it. You can't have anything in there that is not used for embalming. Even a stretcher, you can't store your stretchers in there. One time the inspector showed up and we had moved a bunch of chairs into there, like the extra chairs that you set up for funerals. And I was stalling with the inspector while our intern ran in and just grabbed them and ran them out the back and just put them into the garage. And it was silly. It's not like we kept them in there all the time. It just happened to be, we were cleaning the carpets, we did whatever. It was, but they're not supposed to be in there. You can't keep them in there. They don't want them in there, especially when you're embalming and things like that. And then you're gonna take them out and people are gonna sit on them. Like, yeah, I was in the wrong on that one, but these things happen, right? So FTC telephone price disclosures new for 2019. The manager may designate an employee, even unlicensed, to provide price information on the phone. So my wife, let's say they decide down at Weber's that, okay, she'll be the person that talks to anybody if they're calling price shopping. Perfectly fine to do so. All she's doing is reading off of the general price list. Responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or an intern. So they did open up and specify what interns are allowed to do. So they opened up a little bit, like, okay, an intern should have this exposure and they should be able to explain a little bit more about what's on a price list and what the prices are. So that multiple ownership disclosure, person who owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey. And it has to be along with the name of the funeral home and the municipality. Description, again, enough to identify where is this place. New for 2019, the multiple ownership disclosure only needs to be on the general price list. You don't need to put it on the casket price list and the outer burial container price list, just on the general price list. But mortuary use issues, this is something else that changed over the last couple of years. Previously in for 2019, mortuary shall not be used as a site for recovering organ tissues, including DNA. They didn't let you take anything off of somebody. The only thing you were allowed to take was a lock of hair. They've opened that up and they said, okay, you can collect DNA via cheek swab or nail clippings and or blood collection. Maybe the site of examination to determine the cause of mental death. And that was always the case. You're always allowed to have an autopsy at the funeral home. If you had a pathologist come in and, do an autopsy, you were always allowed to do this. But this whole collecting DNA via cheek swab or nail clippings or blood collection, that's very new. That was not allowed prior to 2019. You were only allowed to cut a lock of hair. So food of the mortuary, this changed in, like I said, a couple of years ago, overturned in August 2019. I know the place I work. Oh my God, the owner bitches and moans about this. Like, I hate this thing. I'm like people like to have a cup of coffee. It is what it is. Prior to 2019, you couldn't do anything like that. You couldn't have anything other than just water. Plain old water is the only thing you could serve to folks. Now they open it up. You may serve and allow food and non-alcoholic beverages to be served at the funeral home, but cannot be prepared at the funeral home. You can't have people come in, open up a kitchen and start cooking things up. Right, they show up with a thing of food, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly legal to do so. So again, if you close a funeral home, again, this is all news 2019, you must show evidence to the state board that the EDRS account is closed. You must inform the state board of the location and the individual in charge of the funeral home records. So they never specified that before. Now it's like, okay, well, we're closing. Well, somebody needs to take the records. And just like if they show up at your funeral home today and they go, we need this year's records immediately, we need the last 6 years within 2 weeks. Same thing is true of a closed funeral home. So somebody takes account for these records, and let's say you close and you retire and you hand it all off to your competitor or whatever, that first year needs to be accessible immediately, with the last 6 years being accessible within 2 weeks. So interns and intern regulations, again, what are the precepts or qualifications? Idea is that, again, you have to be licensed at least 2 years, you have to be a licensee in good standing. How many interns? A funeral home can only have 2. And remember, to have one, they need to do at least 25 cases a year. And the idea behind that is that if you're an intern and you do all 3 years at this funeral home and you do all in box, all funerals, then you would have the 75, 75 to 25 by the end. Really, 75 to 75 is really what that comes from. 20, if you break it down 25, 20, 25, 50, 75 over 3 years. The internship specifics, again, the time, the case, and the background, the idea that it's 2 years by default. If you have more than 90 credits prior to funeral service education, it'll drop down to 1 year, but you can take up to 3 years. And during that time, you have to do the 75 embalming, 75 funerals, 25 sets of funeral arrangements. And again, that background, that idea that you need that, you can start your internship at any point, but if you're doing the first 60 credits, it's considered a concurrent internship. And that's that last thing that I'm coming to here, right? So let's say you just got out of high school or something, right? I'll give you a better example. My mom, she got licensed in her 40s. And so she got done, she had never done any college. My dad dies and she's like, okay, I need to get licensed. And we're living at a funeral home, whatever. So she had to do 60 credits prior to funeral service education. During those 60 credits, those first 2 years of schooling, she was doing her internship, but that was a quote unquote concurrent internship. I know that you're doing the internship while you're doing that last year of funeral service education, but it's not considered concurrent at that point for a real strange reason. It's a weird definition they make. Internship extension, remember, you can always extend it up to a 3rd year. If you fail that state board practical, you have to wait 30 days and you have to pay the charge. I forgot what the charges are. I want to say it's $125, but you have to pay that again if you fail it. So again, new changes as of 2019, preceptor is not going to be convicted of a crime within 5 years. Again, this must be a crime related to funeral service or moral turpitude. You cannot have revocation, suspension, or surrender of license from any professional board. Licenses are now required to notify the mortuary board in writing within 30 days upon the conviction of any crime or arrest, suspension, indictment, etc., and so forth. Speeding tickets are not included in this. And this used to be something we would look forward to when people when they were relicensed in the 2-year period, because they publish these things in the forum. So you could see who got arrested in the last 2 years, like, oh, so-and-so got a DUI or whatever the case may be. Now it's if you get arrested for anything, you need to notify the state board within 30 days. If you get popped on anything, again, you'll make mistakes. I get it. I don't smoke pot or anything. I think pot is pretty much legal in New Jersey anywhere, but let's say it's not. You get pulled over, you've got a bag of weed in your pocket or something. I don't know. I guess I don't smoke marijuana. And they pull it out and you get arrested for it. All right, well, you've got to relay that over to the state board. You know, it's something you have to tell them within 30 days now. The state board clarified intern responsibilities, participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposing of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, meaning that you work at a funeral home, there's 3 funeral directors. John Smith is your preceptor. John Smith is out of town, and you're now working under Mary Smith. Fine, perfectly allowed to do so. You know, it's the idea that you can do this under any licensed practitioner of mortuary science. Quoting prices when funeral arrangements are being made. The preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing the statement of funeral goods and services with the intern before providing it to the consumer for review. Meaning, you sit down, you make a set of arrangements with the family. You go, okay, folks, hang here for just a minute. Let me go ask Mary Smith to look this over. And she looks it over. She goes, oh, everything's good. She signs off on it. You take it in, you hand it to the family. They go, everything looks swell. And they sign off on it. Fine. Perfectly fine. Interns and advertisements, and they switched this up a little bit on us too. If an intern in an ad or website or social media is to be listed as John Doe, New Jersey intern registration number, and you need to have your intern number listed in that. In the same way that we had to put our funeral services license on there. Different forms of ownership, corporate. Again, you'll find this in different structures throughout the state. Use of the manager name, titles, and sign. The idea that a manager's name needs to be either on the sign or at the front door, but it doesn't have to be on both. And remember, you can either have manager, executive director, or senior director. It all means the same thing, but you have to pick one and stick with that. It can either be on the sign or it can be on the front door or near the front door. Either way is fine, but you don't have to do both. So, okay, so things of the death of an owner, how long do you have to notify the state board, right? And these are things I leave open-ended because I want you to look them up. If there's a new installation, meaning I go down, I buy a funeral home down the street, that would be a new installation. Or I own a funeral home down the street and I buy the house next door and we move it next to it. Like we're going to move the whole operation over. Well, that would be a new installation, right? Like all of these things are considered new installation. How long do I have to notify the state on these? If you close a funeral home, what do you have to do? And we'll talk about that in a bit, but what's your time frame on that? Are you allowed to have an unlicensed owner? Yes, you are. It's an interesting thing where you can't run under the name of the owner if they're unlicensed. Um, if it's a proprietorship, if it's not a proprietorship, I should say. So what I always point out is my parents bought a funeral home in 1977, I want to say. So it was a proprietorship. Tom and Judy Daley owned it, and Tom was licensed. He dies in 1985. Now my mom owns it, right? It is what it is. It's no longer a proprietorship according to the state. So that's now a trade name, right? Now she went to school from 1985 to 1988. In 1988, she gets licensed. It goes back to being a proprietorship at that point because she is licensed. Or she can use it, they consider it that way as far as the state is concerned. It's one of these weird things where if you are licensed and you are a sole owner, it's a proprietorship, it's not a partnership, it's not a corporate ownership, and you are licensed, it can be considered a proprietorship by the state. It's a weird little technicality thing. So pre-need licensees. Remember the different forms that you need to use, especially if you're using a trust account versus insurance. And again, you need to disclose to people where this money is going. Change of funeral home. How much time do you have? If somebody calls up and says, I don't want to use you anymore, I want to use brand X. Well, how long do you have to transfer that over to brand X, whether that be insurance or a trust? All right. So again, I know the answer to it. I'm just not going to give it to you. I want you to look it up. The pre-need ledger, what needs to be in that pre-need ledger? Can you have a cancellation fee? No, of course not. Everything has to be trusted. You spend 4 hours with the family and they're a pain in the ass, and you sit there, you go over everything under the damn sun with them. And they okay, great. Here's a check for 10 grand or whatever. And they call you the next day and go, no, well, we want to use brand X. You get nothing on it. You just took that 4 hours and it was what it was. And again, that 100% pre-need trust, 100% has to go into it. You can't keep anything for yourself, which I think ultimately is a good thing. I know dealing with funeral homes like out of Florida, for example, we had a case where a woman made a pre-arrangements for her mom in like 1991 down in Florida, and she came up, her mom moved up here to New Jersey because she needed her daughter to care for her. And she said, can you transfer the funds? And I contacted them, like, yeah, we'll give you like $1,200. I'm like, it's been like 25 years. Like, what are you kidding me? Like, no, we keep all the interest off. I'm like, are you joking me? Pre-need in Florida is a nightmare, but whatever. It makes sense. It's all for consumer protection. It is what it is. You take a hit here and there, but it is for consumer protection. The trust issues, you have to have at least 200 accounts to be able to take a commission out of it, which would be 1% of the interest. So if you look at like something like Choices has thousands of accounts. They take 1% of the interest so that they can fund people to work there and send out the proper paperwork and make sure everything is done right and everything else. But you need to have at least 200 accounts to be able to do that. Now, with commissions on insurance policies, if you get an insurance license, it's not a bad idea to do so. You're absolutely allowed to take a commission on a newly issued insurance policy. Meaning somebody walks in, they go, I want to pay for mom's pre-need, here's a check for 10 grand. You go, great, I'll drop it into insurance. And the insurance company goes, we'll give you whatever in a commission. And there are people that make their whole careers out of that. It's fine. What you cannot take a commission on is somebody comes in and it's, well, dad worked for DuPont for 45 years and he has an old industrial insurance policy. So here it is, he's going into Medicaid spend down. Can you transfer this over and something? It's not, unless you're opening up a new insurance account, it's not something you can take a commission on. POD accounts are perfectly allowed. Payment on death, these were more common, I think, back in the 80s and the 90s, where you would write up a total amount on a funeral and send somebody down to the bank. They go, all right, well, how much is the funeral? Okay, it's I get 10 grand. I'll just use a nice round number. Okay, well, we'll open up an account, and then when a death happens, we send somebody down with a death certificate and we'll pay this out. Not very common these days, but not illegal. There's nothing wrong or illegal about it. So new for 2019, you must notify social services when any refund of an irrevocable prepaid funeral. It used to be just $500 and up. So remember that irrevocable, somebody has to be within 6 months of going on to Medicaid. And the idea is you protect those funds. You protect those funds when they're going to spend down. You spend more money in your last 3 years of life than at any point. Because let's say you go into a nursing home easily is $12,000-$13,000 a month. So somebody can burn through their entire life savings in 9, 10, 11 months, right? So then they go into state aid, right? They go into Medicaid, but a prepaid funeral does not count against that. So, but it has to be irrevocable, right? If somebody just comes in like, I'm C. Montgomery Burns, and I'm worth more money than anything, and I'm going to prepay my funeral, and they're just throwing money around. It's different. You can make it revocable, and they show up tomorrow or a year from now and go, I want my money back. Fine, whatever. But when it's irrevocable, it's different. That's done to be held specifically so it doesn't count against their estate, and they can go on to Medicaid. It used to be if you did the funeral and there was more than $500 left over, like it just performed well, choices, let's say, performed well, and there was $457 left over, you can just give it back to the family. Now, if there's a penny left over, you have to notify Social Security or social services, excuse me, that yes, there was extra money left over, and they're going to want that money. So advertising, you have to do the name as registered. If you're Smith Funeral Home and you decide, I want to be Smith Memorial Home for some reason, you can't do it. You have to change your name with the state board to be able to change, to be able to advertise that. The manager has to be listed. If there's novelty items, which is 2 lines or less, meaning like a pen. I had an uncle, my uncle Paul used to have he used to make oh, what were those things called? I don't golfing tees, I guess you call them, or whatever. Whatever you tee off on, right? And you know, Bud Funeral Home, and so small, right, that you would just like Bud Funeral Home and then just the municipality in Woodbury, New Jersey, and that's perfectly fine. So if it's a small novelty item, you can just have 2 lines on it, having the funeral home name and then the municipality where they'll list it. He used to take those things and just throw them all over the, I'm going to call it a tee box. I don't know where you tee off from. I don't golf. I know nothing about golf, but he would just throw them out all over. And it was his advertising, I guess. But you can do the same thing with pens. It's a small novelty item. Otherwise, everything has to be on there. You have to have your name, your address, the manager's name, their license number, you know, the telephone number. You need to have all of that information listed on it. Logos and obits. Do I have the next one? Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. Testimonials. You cannot have a testimonial unless somebody actually used the funeral home. Like I live right near what is the name of that car store? In Palmyra, there's a really big car store. They've got like Lamborghinis and stuff there. And darn it, is going to at 3 in the morning, I'm going to wake up and remember what the name is. But they were always running ads with like professional ball players. Like I'm going back like 10 years, like Cliff Lee when he played for the Phillies. They would have ads with him in there. You can't do that with a funeral home unless the person actually used the funeral home. So, you know, if who are the 2 big quarterbacks right now? Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is going to be running one of your ads. He actually has to have used your funeral home. Or if Hurts, you're going to run something to Jalen Hurts, he actually has to have used the funeral home. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on Sunday, isn't it? Price reductions. This is an interesting concept. So if you run, and this is not something that pops up a lot in funeral service, but it is what it is. If you were going to run something on the price reduction, like, okay, we sell this casket for $500, but if you come in tomorrow, you can get it for $300, right? Kind of a rare thing. Now, basically what they say is the cost of that casket has to be less than what you initially had it at for at least 30 days before you run that ad. Meaning that you've got a casket, you sell it for $500 normally. You want to run an ad saying, well, you know, this casket is normally $800, but we'll sell it to you for $500, right? Like, it was just a shady sales technique. So you're not really doing a discount on it. You're just lying about the price and dropping it down. You would have to have it, you would have to raise the price of the casket to $800 for at least 30 days. And then you can advertise that price discount down to $500. It's a weird thing, and it really doesn't pop up a lot in funeral service. Now, on to that logo on obits. So, and again, I'm not picking on the folks at Chinosky. I've got nothing against them. I just grabbed this out of the Courier Post. I was just doing a search one day and came across this. If you run an image like that in the bottom of an obit, then they decided that was an advertisement, meaning two things. You need to have everything in there as required by an ad, meaning the address of the funeral home, the township, zip code, the manager's name, their number, their license number. If you just run like services 6 to 8 p.m. Chinosky Funeral Home in Runnymede or 1100 North Black Horse Pike, Runnymede, you don't have to do that. But if you start running an image in there, they go, no, you need to pay for that. And the family shouldn't have to pay for that. And you need to do everything that you need to do in a normal ad. And people were getting a bit excessive with this. Funeral homes were, where it'd be like, I remember one was like a big lighthouse. And it was like, we'll light your way over troubled waters, or some long drawn out thing. And it's like, my God, why do families have to pay for that? It is what it is. So advertising includes aerial displays. I've never seen an aerial display, whatever, circulars, handbills, flyers, letters, any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. New in 2019, all advertising rights extended to funeral home website and social media. So if you've got a Facebook page or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, all of that has to be included in that, which again makes sense. So fines, the first offense can be up to $10,000. Second, subsequent can be up to $20,000. Not that it would be, but you should remember those numbers. They like to pop you on those things and ask you these questions. So in terms of the depth of burial has to be at least, it's basically, if you think about it like this, it's if somebody's in a vault, it does not matter. If somebody is not in a vault and it's just a casket, it's 4 feet down, right? That's 4 feet from the top of the casket. So if you think about the bottom of the casket, that's roughly 2 feet. So think about like 6 feet down, right? So like 6 feet under, or 4 feet from the top of it if they're not in a vault of some sort. Remember, there are temporary vaults or temporary burials, excuse me, where let's say you're waiting for somebody to be entombed in a mausoleum that hasn't been built yet. It has been yet to be built. You've got 4 years on that, but you have to have that marked off on the burial permit. Like, this is a temporary burial, we're just waiting, but they'll give you up to 4 years on that. Multiple burials, this can be done 2 different ways. If you think about this, you can bury 2 people together in the same casket. And the way that the legislation is written on this is that the right to control is the normal that it would be, right? Spouse, children, parents, siblings, etc., except it includes at the top of the list the decedent. And it's written this way because this legislation or this regulation really came from like the idea that, let's say, a woman is giving birth and the child dies and she knows that she's going to die. And she goes, I want the child to be buried with me. Okay, that gives the approval for that to be done, right? That's really, I think, that the breadth of that regulation. But yeah, you can bury two people together. It doesn't have to be a child and a mother. It can be like we had a family. I had a student who had a family who it was a young couple and they're both murdered. A terrible, terrible thing. And somebody broke into their house. It was bad. And they buried them in one big casket. And that's perfectly legal. It's perfectly fine to do so. Doesn't term it, remember, with multi-death burials that let's say you've got one person buried here, one person buried here, and you want to disinter this person, you get all the permissions from this person as well, right? So all of these people need to approve before you can get this person out. And here's a weird thing about New Jersey law. To disinter, you need to consent the spouse and adult children. Yeah, the spouse has all the control when they bury somebody. Now, they want to go and disinter, they need the spouse and all adult children to approve. It's weird. And I don't know why they write the legislation this way, but it is what it is. So cremation, the idea of the crematory and the idea that is a point of disposition, right? It's the same thing as going to a cemetery. You need the presence of a licensee and their record keeping. Take a look at that, all of that. If you have questions about that, reach out to me, but you need to know what the crematory's record keeping is. I don't know why you're not running crematories, but for some reason they test you on this stuff. I don't know. Unclean cremated remains, what are you allowed to do with them? You have to wait at least a year and you have to make a diligent attempt to reach out to the family, right? You have to normally send out at least a letter or two to them, a certified letter, and then you can't just take the cremated remains and chuck them in the trash. You have to dispose of them properly in a decent manner, whether that be scattering them or burning them or whatever. You can just go, yeah, whatever, I'll chuck you. You have to do something proper by them. Even then, most funeral homes just hold on to them. I know every funeral home I've ever worked in has like hundreds of them. I've got probably 60 sets at school. Statement of funeral goods and services, new for 2019. Now, this is minutia on my part, okay? The statement at the top, the statement is subject to change by agreements of both parties. It's a weird thing to change. The check boxes for sex was removed because sex has become a little bit more, sex and gender has become a little bit more complicated, we'll say, over the last couple of years. So there's, instead of having male, female, just leave it open-ended. You can write in whatever the person's gender or sex was, sanitary care without embalming has been changed to other prep of body, use of facilities and staff reviewing to visitation, added use of equipment and staff for graveside, the line including accompanying of remains to the place of final disposition. And again, this is really minutia on my part, okay? Again, continued receiving and forwarding remains on different lines. So it used to just be one line and they switched up into two. Optional package service section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. So if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. Does this allow for other items, meaning a memorial service, to be added to a direct cremation? It does not. According to FTC rules, if somebody chooses a direct cremation, that's it. You do nothing else. If somebody wants a cremation followed by memorial service, you're allowed to discount things down as much as you want. But that would mean that you would need to write up, basic services of funeral director and staff, transfer of remains to the funeral home, storage of remains, whatever, right? And then if you wanted to discount that down, you can, but you have to itemize everything if it's not a direct cremation. So again, other minor, and again, this is minutia on my part. I should probably clean these out because I think we're going overkill on this. Clergy or church is changed to officiant or place of worship. Newspaper notice to obituary charges. Pallbearers have been removed, but you can write that in there. If somebody wants to have professional pallbearers, you can just write that down in your cash advance items. Price reduction removed, but it can be written in. So you have a total and then a blank line and then another area that says total, which is kind of weird. But if you want to discount it down, you can discount it down in that secondary line. And this, okay, I wanted to get this down to our direct cremation charges. Okay, I'm going to discount $1,800. Boop. And then just write that whatever that total is at the bottom. It's perfectly fine and perfectly legal to do so. So miscellaneous, where to file the death certificate. Remember, you can get it from the state. Most people do, but you have to file it locally. And the idea being that, like, I've screwed up a death certificate once, and I put Delran on there when I was thinking it was Riverside, but it was one street over. And the local registrar, when I filed it, she's like, no, you got it wrong. She's like, hey, you got the wrong street. She was like, that's actually Delran rather than Riverside. I was like, oh, geez. So I made the switch. Now, if you did that, if you file that at a state level, they're not going to notice that. At least chances are very unlikely that they will, so you can file it in one of three places: municipality of death, municipality of the funeral home, municipality of disposition, right? So wherever they died, wherever the funeral home is, or wherever the cemetery or crematory is, right? But you're once it's been filed, you can get them from the state. You can order them from the state. The cost of the permit being like $5. Renting a funeral home to another. Now, this is an interesting one. This happens all the time. Everybody does it illegally. You're supposed to have a special use permit that you send to the state board before you do this. And it's supposed to be a funeral home or manager of a funeral home renting another funeral home. I couldn't just put myself out there and run an ad saying, yeah, call me. And whenever a death happens, I'll just call someplace and we'll rent a funeral home. We'll call it a day. No, it has to be one funeral home, established funeral home, renting another funeral home. You're supposed to send a letter to the state board saying, like, look, we're going to rent this funeral home because my Aunt Bessie lived in that town, and that's where that funeral home is. And we're going to use it over these dates or whatever, but it has to be one funeral home renting another funeral, not a funeral director renting another funeral, a funeral home renting a funeral home, not a funeral director renting a funeral home. All right. A receiving vault. This is one of those rare things. You're never going to see one of these. Used to be cemeteries had to have a receiving vault because, let's say you showed up in February and it was too cold to open the ground. They would have to hold on to the body for a week. And this is still the case if you go to Buffalo or Rochester or something. I've never seen one of these. My predecessor said he saw one in like 1973 or something. Basically, the law says that if a cemetery has a receiving vault where they're going to store a body, it needs to be either 5 feet below ground or built in a way to stop any noxious fumes from coming in. Otherwise, you can only hold a body there for 48 hours, an unembalmed body. I doubt you'll see a lot of questions about that. It's one of these dumb things that. Now, here's the last weird one. Okay, so a couple of years ago, the state board got a complaint from a family saying there was tape on a decedent. Like what had happened was there was plastic on them and they had taken tape and wrapped it around it, and they saw it was duct tape. So they knee-jerk reaction. They said, okay, every funeral home now needs to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape. To which everybody said, what the hell is flesh-colored? What do you mean by that? They were like, Every community can decide for themselves what flesh colored is. Like it made no sense. But you need to have basically clear or white tape, at every funeral home in case you put plastics on somebody and you need to tape it down. It was a dumb thing. I have no idea what the hell the state board was thinking on that one, but it's one of those odd things that who knows, they could ask you about it. Welfare versus Medicaid, remember the difference? It's not Medicaid, it is welfare, all right? And the amounts based on, like if somebody's, what is it? Like a day to 2 weeks, 2 weeks to 2 years, and then 2 years on, and I forget the numbers on it. But you need to know those numbers and what comes to the funeral home and what goes to the cemetery and how much the family can contribute. If you need to know the numbers, you're always welcome to email me. I just forget them off the top of my head. The form to use. What do you use to actually file that, right? They've changed the number on that a couple of times on the last couple of years. And where's the claim submitted and what county? Remember, every county is a little bit different on this. I know I live in Burlington County. It's very easy to live with, to deal with Burlington County. Camden County can be very difficult, but like we always called it the PA 11, which is Public Assistance 11, but now it's the NJWS 11, NJWS 11, work New Jersey Work First 11, NJWF, excuse me, NJWF 11. And yeah, it's I've had students tell me they've seen both on there. And remember, traditionally it was the PA 11, but they changed it to the NJWF 11. I don't know why I'm having a hard time getting that out tonight, but so emergency burial permit, you don't see much about this anymore. You should probably think that out of there. It used to be if you now you can just print one up. If you had a long weekend, you had somebody who for religious reasons or whatever needed to be buried on, let's say, Sunday and it's Friday, you used to be able to go to a judge and get one of these issued. Not really the case anymore. You can just print one up off the EDRS. So right, doesn't come into play much. But if there's no person in charge of the cemetery, the funeral director is in charge of filing the proper paperwork for it. Communicable disease, listing and reporting within 12 hours, supposed to list you're supposed to report the diseases. I'll show you them in a second. Reporting veterans deaths. So again, this goes back to this idea of no person in charge of the cemetery. Let's say you pick somebody. Here's a weird scenario. You're never going to see this, but let's say somebody dies at a state and they die in PA. They're a veteran. You bring them into the state. You go to a little small municipal cemetery where there is nobody in charge of it, and you haven't done burial there since 1975, let's say. And you just contact a grave digger. They come out, they open the grave, and you bury the person, and they happen to be a veteran. You're supposed to notify the head of veterans burials in that county and notify them of the death. If they had died in state, they would have been notified by EDRS. If the person had been at a cemetery that was run by somebody working there, they're supposed to notify the person at a county level. So if nobody's there, you're supposed to be in charge of that and notify somebody at a county level. You're never going to see this in practicality, but these are things they like to test on. So again, EDRS burial at sea, what is required at burial at sea? And this is all broken down in the book we use for principles. I don't know what books you guys use, but there's a whole breakdown on, and this is good for both the state test and the national test, how much ballast needs to be put in there, where do you need to drill the holes, how much weight do you need to put in, things like that, how many straps need to be put in there. And I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Signatures, death certificate and disinterment. And disinterment, I wouldn't worry so much about 7 signatures on disinterment, but I don't think they're going to beat you up on that too much. The statement of funeral goods and services, who needs to sign that? And again, the family, whoever is taking charge of this, they might have a very well-intentioned neighbor that comes over and they're like, I'll take care of these charges. That's perfectly legal. Nothing wrong with that. Your FTC disclosures and disclaimers, right? What are the disclosures that you need on the general price list? What are the disclosures you need on the statement of funeral goods and services? And there are 6 on the statement of funeral goods, excuse me, there's 6 on the general price list, and there is 3 on the statement of funeral goods and services. Now, remember, from a national standpoint, you had to put a disclosure on there about cash advances. You're taking money out of the cash advances, like you're charging a fee for it. We don't have that in New Jersey. We're not allowed to charge that, so it's not there, but it still exists, at least on a national level. So Universal Anatomical Gift Act, and very much the idea that somebody calls up, like we have a donor program here at Mercer. If somebody calls up and says, I want my mom back, I can say, well, go pound sand. I don't care. Well, I wouldn't do that. But when somebody signs a body over to one of these programs, that's it. They're giving you full control over them, not just constructive control. Victims of crimes compensation, look at the numbers on it, the figures on it. Medical waste, what do you do with it? And then the wills terminology, that stuff. God, I hate that stuff. Oh, God. Ugh. All right, so prohibited embalming compounds. Okay, none of us are making embalming fluid, but this is what we're not allowed to include in it. Arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, fluoride, any poisonous alkaloid, copper, cyanogen. It's stuff that you need to know. And then communicable diseases, you're supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours if you have a body with smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, or plague. I'm guessing you don't see a lot of plague cases. I don't know. And anyway, good. Questions about any of that, guys? Guys and gals, men and women?
I'm trying to think. There was a lot we went over.
There is a lot. Yeah, we covered a lot there. If you have questions, please feel free. Not a problem. All right, well, look, I'll put my email address in here. If anybody has questions, I know there's a lot of people from other schools here, and that's fine. Always feel free to reach out. If you have questions about any of the stuff, I don't care where you went to school. I just want to see everybody pass this test. It's one of those deals where this and the national, I'm going to see everybody get through it on the first time. So, anyone else? Questions, comments, concerns?
I mean, you mentioned something earlier about the 50% rule. I'm looking at my notes now. Just if you could make it a little clearer about, like, I know you have to make a disclaimer to the consumer if you own more than 50% of what is it, the funeral home and like the other business.
If you own more than 50% of the funeral home, let's say you own a neighboring funeral home, and well, here's the fear. The idea behind that legislation is, let's say, people walk into Brand X funeral home and you go, well, the funeral is $7,000, and they don't realize that you bought out the competitor. So, half a mile down the road is Brand Y funeral home. And they go, I wouldn't pay more than $6,500 for a funeral. And they storm out, and you call the other funeral home and you go, hey, this family's going to come in. Don't charge more than $6,500. They go, okay, great. Click. And they go, oh, yeah, total $6,500. So that's sort of the fear behind it, I guess, or the idea why they pushed it. But again, if it basically comes down to anybody who owns more than one funeral home, you have to disclose it. Because like I said, when I was in business, we owned, like I said, it was a breakdown of 40% that I owned, 40% my brother owned, 20% my mom owned. But ultimately, that was of a business, and the business owned the funeral homes, and there was no way around it, And initially we thought it was like, oh, I just own 40% of it. No, you own 40% of a business that owns this company, that owns this business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense now that you're explaining it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Do you know how many questions are going to be on it?
Yeah, it's normally 50 questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Someone else asked me, any way to access a recording as we prepare the rest of the month? Yeah, sure. I'm going to put it onto our YouTube page, and I'll make it open. Most of my classes that I record, I make them closed. I'll just make this open, and it'll just be there. So if you just go to, it's MCCC Funeral Service Education on YouTube. It'll just be there, and you're more than welcome to download it or watch it or whatever works best for you.
Thank you.
Sure thing. How many inches does the manager sign need to be? 1.5 inches. It needs to be 1.5 inches for the, and I don't know why they specify that, but yeah, 1.5 inches the manager sign needs to be. So, anyone else? All right, fantastic. Well, good. Like I said, give me a day or so. I'll have this posted up there tomorrow. And take care, guys. I wish you guys all the best in this test. And if you have questions about any of this or anything else, even about the national or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk to anybody, regardless of where you went to school. I don't care. Don't play favorites, man. So, whatever works best. All right. And all the best to you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Take care, all.